What's up guys, welcome back to Phil Always Wins. Today we are going to be breaking down the full card of UFC Fight Night, Song Yadong taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow me on Instagram to be the first to know about my weekly UFC betting tips. And to kick off the night, we have a welterweight fight between Meng and Cam Nelson, where I'm taking Meng to get the win. He's only 31 years old, but he has 35 wins, with 28 of them coming by way of knockout, and now he's getting another opportunity to display his skills in front of his home crowd in China. What Ding does very well is fighting a very technical kickboxing fight, and in a way he kind of reminds me of Sean Strickland in the sense that all he does is keep the fight technical and try to march his opponents down and overwhelm them with his aggression until he can find a finish. Now Nelson isn't the worst fighter and he could make this very competitive, but he only has 5 fights on his record, and I think that lack of experience is going to cost him in this fight. It's going to be interesting because Nelson does have the capabilities to find a submission or knockout, but given that Ding has a very durable chin, the best approach for Nelson would be to try and take Ding down and find a submission. Now, even though we haven't seen Ding's takedown defense been tested yet, especially by a true UFC prospect like Nelson, I still think that his experience advantage is going to help him to keep the fight standing, and I think if he can keep the fight standing, he's going to outpoint Nelson until he wins on the scorecards by a unanimous decision. Next up, we have a women's strawweight fight between Jinnan and Julia Polastri, where I'm taking Polastri to get the win. Everybody, and I mean everybody, is underestimating Jinnan because she was supposed to be this very dangerous striker, but she got dominated on the feet in her debut fight against a 42-year-old Angela Hill. That fight was sort of seen as a setup fight for Jinnan to make a name for herself because she was fighting in her home country against a ranked opponent that was already quite old and has looked questionable in a few of her last recent fights, so it was a perfect opportunity for Jinnan to get straight into the rankings. Sure, she got outstruck and got pieced up on the feet, but what everybody is ignoring is that she was still able to fight at an impressive pace on the feet against a solid veteran. That's what worries me because although Polastri can also push a high pace, sometimes she needs to take a small break after throwing a long combination, and that gives Jinnan the opportunity to capitalize. Jinnan is getting yet another opportunity to fight in her home country in front of her home crowd, and I could only imagine how hungry she is to get this win. But the main reason that I'm backing Polastri is because I think that she'll land the more damaging shots over the course of 15 minutes. Polastri has also had a few camps dedicated to dealing with grapplers, and so if she is smart, she could resort to shooting for a takedown because nobody would expect her to do so, but I doubt that she'll initiate the grappling because that's not her comfort zone. Honestly, I would love to see her just shoot for a takedown, but even if she fights in the clinch, I think that will be enough to win this fight. And I think that the majority of this fight will stay standing and that it'll be a close back and forth fight until the final bell, where Polastri will win a unanimous decision. Next up, we have a bantamweight fight between Louis Lawrence and Hector Santiago, where I think that Lawrence is going to get the win. Lawrence is the much more proven fighter coming into this matchup because we've already seen him go through the Road to UFC tournament and earn his contract by winning a very tough fight against Solon Grambo. He had to win multiple fights against UFC level prospects just to get here, while Santiago is coming in as a late replacement on only 11 days notice, and he's going to be making his UFC debut this Saturday. Lawrence does a good job of applying constant pressure on the feet, and he's able to do so because he mixes in his boxing and wrestling together really well. He'll more than likely walk Santiago down behind his punches, and as soon as Santiago starts worrying about the boxing, Lawrence can change level and shoot for a takedown. That's going to make it hard for Santiago to comfortably fight off the back foot because he can't just focus on countering the punches when there's always a chance that Lawrence is going to shoot for a takedown. The only thing that really worries me about Lawrence is that he's quite hittable when pressuring forward because sometimes he'll just put up his guard and accept the shots so that he can keep walking his opponents down. That could be dangerous against a fighter like Santiago because he has very heavy hands, with 5 of his 6 wins coming by way of knockout, and he's going to have chances to land clean whenever Lawrence gets too comfortable just absorbing punches behind his guard. But Lawrence does have a pretty good chin, and I think that he'll be able to tank some of these shots without completely losing control of the fight. His constant aggression is going to look pretty good in the judges' eyes, and I reckon he wins a unanimous decision. Next up, we have a bantamweight fight between Francesco Nucci and Xiao, where I think that Xiao is going to get the win. Xiao is one of those fighters that seems like they should be on a massive winning streak, but somehow he's 1-3 in the UFC. He's a very entertaining fighter to watch because he loves to fight a very aggressive and chaotic fight, and he also loves to mock his opponents after getting hit or after landing something clean, and sometimes his cockiness results in him losing the round because he doesn't capitalize when he hurts his opponents, and instead he just mocks them or does an emote on them. But I think that he's going to lock in and not mock his opponent as much and focus more on the fight because he needs to win this fight. He's currently on a 2-fight losing streak, and he's also coming off a loss to Cody Garbrandt in a fight where he should have won if he didn't fight a dirty fight and lose 2 points. The reason I'm favoring Xiao is because Xiao is going to go out there and do what he does best, which is put on the pressure, and I think that his constant aggression is going to win him this fight because Francesco prefers to fight at a slower pace, and he'll more than likely be fighting on the back foot for the entire fight. I think that Xiao is going to be the one that's controlling the pace for the majority of the fight, and I just think that he won't give Francesco an opportunity to ever find his rhythm. Francesco will have his moments where he lands something, maybe when Xiao gets too reckless, but over the course of 3 rounds, I think that Xiao's pressure, volume, and aggression is going to be enough for him to win a unanimous decision. Next up, we have a featherweight fight between Sean Woodson and Jack Jenkins, where I think that Woodson's gonna get the win. You guys gotta let me know if I'm the only one that sees this, but I think that Sean Woodson sort of looks like Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc. because he has an oddly short body with very long torsos, and he has very long limbs as well. But anyways, back to the fight. He's one of the tallest fighters in the featherweight division, standing at 6'3", while Jenkins is only 5'7", so Jenkins is going to have to close a ridiculous amount of distance every single time he wants to land something. Now Jenkins is going to try and close the distance by kicking his way inside because he has very nasty kicks to the body and legs, which is usually a huge part of his game plan anyway. This could really work in his favor because Woodson's legs are quite thin and he tends to stand quite still at times, which make his legs an easy target. If Jenkins starts chopping his legs down, Woodson could start to slow down and be more vulnerable on the feet, which is the only way I could see Jenkins getting the win. But Woodson has such an awkward style of fighting, and almost no fighter can break his style down because he's good at using his boxing to fight from within the pocket, and he's also good at using his range advantage to fight on the back foot and pick his shots. So I could see Jenkins being the aggressor and trying to chase Woodson down the entire fight, but getting outlanded and losing on the scorecards. Woodson is also the more experienced fighter who was on a 6-fight winning streak before his fluke loss to Dan Ige, and I say fluke loss because Woodson wasn't even hurt and the referee stopped the fight. So in my eyes, Woodson is still on a winning streak and he's still a credible fighter to back, and that's why I reckon that he's going to walk through Jenkins and find a knockout in round 2. Next up, we have a flyweight fight between Kevin Borjas and Ray Tsuruya, where I think that Tsuruya is going to get the win. I say this every time I talk about Kevin Borjas, but he tends to always have a very successful round 1 by either securing a knockdown or outlanding his opponents, but then he slows down and starts to throw the fight. He's coming off a very impressive win over Lima, where he was a major underdog. I think it was like plus 500 or something. But I have a theory that he only won that fight because he got a 5-minute break in round 2, and so he was able to re-energize and win the round. Nonetheless, it was still a very impressive performance, but this is going to be a completely different type of fight, because Ray Tsuruya is a very sticky grappler, and all he does is shoot for takedowns after takedowns and threaten submissions. The most likely outcome is Tsuruya taking him down and bullying him there until he finds a submission, but I do see a world where Borjas is able to find an early knockout, and I think it's a tad bit disrespectful for him to be a plus 450 underdog. Borjas has a clear speed and power advantage on the feet, and although he's 2-4 in the UFC, he's been fighting the toughest competition in the flyweight division, and so all of his losses are quite respectable. But I still think that Tsuruya is too much of a prospect for him to handle, and I think that Tsuruya is going to secure the takedowns effortlessly and find an early submission in round 1. Next up, we have a flyweight fight between Andre Lima and Namsrai Batbayar, where I'm taking the underdog Batbayar to get the win. In my opinion, Andre Lima is an overrated prospect. I'm not saying that he's not a good fighter, because I think that he's one of the most technical strikers in the flyweight division, who does a very good job at constantly applying pressure and walking his opponents down. But he's usually a minus 300 or minus 400 favorite in his fights, and when you're that big of a favorite, I expect him to be finishing fights left, right, and center. Instead, he prefers to not rush things, and he likes to fight a more patient yet technical type of striking fight, which usually goes the full distance and into the judges' hands. I don't trust the judges to always favor Lima to win the fight because his biggest problem is his lack of output on the feet. Sometimes he's walking his opponents down and controlling the center of the octagon, but he isn't throwing enough punches to do damage and win the round. Batbayar, on the other hand, he looks like the more hungrier and dangerous prospect because all of his wins have come by either knockout or submission. I think that the main reason that Batbayar is an underdog to win this fight is because he's going to be making his UFC debut this Saturday, but I don't expect him to have any nerves coming into this fight because he won the road to UFC, where he had to fight in the early prelims of some UFC events. And to be honest, I also think that Lima hasn't really been given an opponent who's well-rounded enough to truly test his skill set the way that Batbayar is going to test him this Saturday. So it just makes more sense to me to back a fighter with the higher finishing upside in this matchup, and I reckon that Batbayar will find a club and sub in round 3. Just like that, we are on the main card of the evening where we have Bilar Hasan taking on Nilsson Rojas, where I think that Hasan is going to get the win. Maybe there's a slight bias because I'm half Indonesian, but I think that Hasan is a solid prospect who's going to easily win this fight, and the odds makers think the same thing, given that he's a minus 650 favorite. His biggest advantage in this fight is his longer reach, because generally, he fights his best fight when he's able to maintain his range and pick his shots from a distance. I think that he's going to sit just outside of Rojas' punching range and snipe him with straight shots and kicks to the body, and land counter shots every time Rojas tries to rush in. Rojas, on the other hand, has to make this fight as dirty as possible because he doesn't want to have a clean kickboxing match with Hasan from range. He's gonna constantly move forward and throw big looping shots to try and force Hasan into a messy exchange where one punch can completely change the fight. And so it only makes sense to me that Hasan will eventually find a knockout because Rojas is the fighter that needs to take the much bigger risk just to close the distance. The more Rojas starts crashing forward and throwing those wide power shots, the more openings he's going to leave for Hasan to counter him cleanly, and I think that he'll snipe Rojas coming in, and he'll find a knockout in round 2. Next up, we have a light heavyweight bout between Nucci, and Levy Rodriguez, where I think that Rodriguez is going to get the win. I'm quite surprised that Levy Rodriguez opened up as an underdog to win this fight, and that just goes to show that people love to doubt fighters just because of one loss. Yes, Levy lost his last fight against Felipe Franco, but let's not pretend like he didn't find a lot of success in the striking exchanges, and he lost the fight because he didn't know how to get back to his feet after getting taken down. This is a completely different fight because it'll mainly play out on the feet, which is where Levy has the clear power advantage. We've already seen Louis get hurt badly on the feet by less powerful strikers, and so I think he's really going to struggle to survive, especially early on in the fight when Levy is still full of energy and ready to charge forward. Louis is also the significantly inexperienced fighter with only 4 MMA fights in his career, and I think that the only reason he's fighting in the UFC this Saturday is because the UFC is trying to build up Chinese fighters. In my eyes, the only advantage Louis has coming into this fight is that he's fighting in his hometown of China, so he'll have the crowd backing him up, but I don't think that that'll be enough to intimidate Rodriguez, and I reckon that Rodriguez will waste no time and pressure him early on in the fight until he finds a knockout in round 1. Next up, we have a flyweight fight between Mudereiji and Alex Perez, where I'm taking Mudereiji to get the win. This is a rematch fight between both of these fighters because their first fight ended in a no contest after Alex Perez ate a heavy nut shot and couldn't continue the fight. To be honest, there is a part of me that thinks that Perez knew he was going to lose that fight, and so he took the no contest on purpose because he was struggling to close the distance the whole fight and even got dropped badly in round 2. Not gonna lie though, I picked Perez to win that fight because I thought that his grappling advantage would be a major advantage, but Mudereiji was able to defend every takedown, and if that happens again in this fight, then Perez is going to get knocked out. Mudereiji fights his best fight when he can maintain the distance and pick his shots from a comfortable range, or use his reach advantage to land nasty shots as he fights on the back foot and circles out, which is probably how this fight is going to play out. I could see Perez getting frustrated because he'll more than likely be the aggressor for the entirety of this fight, but he'll be unable to land anything significant because Mudereiji is just too good at sticking and moving outside of his range. So I reckon that Mudereiji will be able to catch Perez when he comes in swinging recklessly, and he'll find a knockout in round 2. Next up, we have a bantamweight fight between Kai Asakura and Aori Chiron, where I think that Asakura is going to get the win. To put it simply, this fight is going to mainly play out on the feet, and Kai Asakura is by far the better striker. I feel like Asakura is going to have a pretty easy time on the feet because Aori's striking is very repetitive and he tends to rely on the same basic combinations over and over again. That might work against a slower and less experienced fighter, but Asakura has already fought and beaten these types of fighters before. He has one of the highest fighting IQs in the bantamweight division, and I reckon that he'll be able to make his reads and find his timing after just one round. Obviously, when I'm complimenting Asakura's IQ, I meant in the striking exchanges because both of these fighters suck on the ground, and so it's actually kind of a blessing for both of them to be facing another striker. But if Aori wants to win this fight, I think that he has to at least threaten the takedowns because that's the only way to slow Asakura down and make him start to fight a more hesitant fight. Asakura is most dangerous when he doesn't need to worry about the takedown threat because then he's able to open up more on the feet, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen this Saturday. I reckon that he's going to take round 1 to sort of play with Aori until he finds his rhythm, and he'll start to overwhelm Aori in round 2, which is when I think he'll find the knockout. Next up, we have a women's strawweight fight between Denis Gomes and Xioanan, where I think that the underdog Gomes is going to get the win. I'm favoring Gomes to get the win here because I think that her youth, activity, and pressure is going to be too much for a 37-year-old Yan to handle, especially since she's coming back after a long layoff. Yan is definitely the cleaner and more technical boxer, especially when she has space to work. She's a very sharp striker that does a good job at managing her distance, and I think that she could find a lot of success early on in the fight if Gomes gives her too much respect and lets her settle into her range. But I don't think that Gomes is going to give her that type of fight. Gomes is going to constantly move forward, close the distance, and try to force Yan into much more exchanges. Instead of allowing Yan to sit back on the outside and pick her shots, Gomes should be pushing her backwards and making her fight a much more higher pace than she wants. That's where I think that this fight is going to start to swing in Gomez's favor, because she's much more comfortable exchanging in the pocket and throwing in volume. She's willing to take one clean shot if it means that she can answer back with 2 or 3 of her own, and I trust her durability enough to keep doing that for all 3 rounds. Yan being out for 16 months is another concern because she's coming back against a much younger and hungrier fighter that's going to immediately force a high-paced fight from the opening bell. Gomes has been staying active and constantly improving every fight, and so I reckon that she'll be able to outwork Yan for all 3 rounds and win a unanimous decision. And just like that, we are on the main event of the evening where we have Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Yadong, where obviously I'm taking Umar to get the win. I feel like everybody has the same opinion as me, where we're backing Umar to get the win because he can push a high wrestling pace for all 5 rounds, and more than likely, Song won't be able to stop the takedowns nor get back to his feet. Some people say that Song made a statement by submitting Figgy, who's a well-respected wrestler, but if we're gonna be honest, Figgy is already very old and his wrestling is nowhere as good as Umar's. Song is going to have to keep this fight standing because that's where he can inflict the most damage, but to be honest, I don't think that Song even has a massive advantage on the feet. Umar's striking is pretty underrated and it's all built on his takedown threats. Song can't just plant his feet and focus on winning the boxing exchanges because the second he starts getting comfortable, Umar can change levels and put him on his back. That constant takedown threat is going to make Song fight a more hesitant fight on the feet, which should allow Umar to land without taking as much risk. I think that this is an easy fight for Umar Nurmagomedov, and I reckon he'll be able to consistently take Song down and control him for the majority of the fight and win a unanimous decision. So that's going to do it for my full card breakdown of UFC Fight Night, Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Yadong. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram @PhilAlwaysWins, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.